This is Michael DeSilva from New Hunter Church of Christ. Welcome to tonight's lesson. We're going to be talking about Revelation lesson number 32. And it's called the Scarlet Woman. What did that mean? Let's get this going here.
5 minutes remaining.
All right. So let's talk about this. What we have here in Revelation 17 is a picture of the woman, the Scarlet Woman, the prostitute woman, is what you'll see here. But before we go into that, before we go into more details about that, let's go to God in prayer. Dear Lord, thank you for this day. Father God, thank you for everything that you give us. Help me, Lord, to get through this lesson tonight in one take, and that we won't have to do two parts to it. Help me to be clear and be focused and not skip or stutter or anything like that. Just help it all to go flowing like a machine, and thank you for everything you do. Please bless this congregation at New Hunter Church of Christ. Please help people to feel led to give, to be good stewards, so that they too can be blessed in materials and other ways because of their gifts of what they give monetarily to us. And thank you, Lord, for everything you do, so it can help bless also our business, the Silva's Media, a Christian business and ministry here for New Hunter Church of Christ, and improve the sound quality on YouTube for our videos. Thanks a lot, Lord, and everything that you do. In Jesus' name, pray, amen. All right, it's been 2 weeks since the last time I saw you all, or last time you saw me. But I'm still here. I had problems with my mouth, but I'm here. But we're going to be talking about lesson number 32 tonight, the Scarlet Woman in Revelation chapter 17. Let's look at Revelation 17, verse 5. Turn there with me. Give me a few seconds to locate that. It says, and upon her forehead was a name that was written. It said, Mystery of Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. Okay, that's where the chapter Revelation 17 opens up with. Revelation 17 verses 1 through 3 says this. And there came one evening, or one of the 7 angels that we talked about earlier in the last couple lessons, in the last 2 lessons before this, that had the 7 bowls and spoke with me by saying, come here, I will show you the very judgment of the great harlot that sits upon the very waters. It says, with whom the kings of the earth committed fornication. It says, and they that dwell in the earth were made drunken with the very wine of these fornications. Now, chapter 7 opens up with one of the angels bearing God's very bowls of wrath, coming near to John with the intention of showing him that the judgment of the great harlot that sits upon many waters, which would be the King James version of what it says, refers to this woman as a whore, a prostitute. It says there is some dispute in many religious world circles today as to who is to be this recipient of God's wrath as pictured in Revelation in the letter. It says when looking at the characteristics of this woman and comparing her to what we know of the Roman Empire, there can be little doubt as to who this infamous woman represents here. So as the angel goes on to great lengths to identifying her all throughout this chapter. And in chapter 19, in verse 18, the angel removes all doubt as to who this woman is. Now let's go to Revelation 17, verse 18. It says, and the woman whom thou sawest in the great city, with which reigns over the kings of the earth. Said there was only one city on earth in the time of John's letter, Revelation, that fit that very description. And the woman can only be the city of Rome. So with this in mind, we will look at the very characteristics of this woman and then examine just how closely she really does resemble the very imperial city. She is introduced to us as a harlot in verse number 1, 17. In verse 5, she is then labeled on her forehead as the mother of harlots. It says being the mother of harlots means being responsible for the what? The procreation of harlots. Okay? It means harlotry in this case is being descriptive of spiritual fornication, or people who show or demonstrate unfaithfulness to the Lord, as recorded in Ezekiel chapter 16 and Jeremiah 2 verse 1 and Hosea 1 verse 1. Imperial Rome compelled the conquered kings to enter into the fornication with her in the form of emperor worship. Says, and they tried to force it upon all her citizens. Says, this we have the very imagery of a woman who by her own actions spawned spiritual harlots, who worship the very emperor instead of the Jehovah true living God. Now, the many waters, as it says, on which the scarlet woman, or harlot woman, that's the scarlet woman, sits in, is explained here in verse 15. And he says unto me, the waters which you saw were the whore that sits, are peoples and multitudes and nations, tongues. Alright, this leads right into verse 2, where the angel says, with whom the kings of the earth have committed fornication. Says the key words here is being with whom. Alright, the imagery here is that the rulers of the people represented the many waters, and they were guilty of fornication with the mother of harlots. And they were specifically mentioned by the angel, signifying that this was coming from the highest levels of government. It says the spiritual fornication in view here mandated from the leadership of the people down to the citizens of the city. Let's look at Revelation 17 verse 3. It says, and he carried me away into the spirit into a wilderness, and then I saw a woman who was sitting on a scarlet colored like beast that was full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. It says, in this very vision the angel removes John from where he was and takes him into the wilderness, where he sees a woman. It says the question immediately arises here and comes to mind, is this the same woman previously depicted, earlier in earlier chapter that's mentioned here? Well, with a closer look and examination of her characteristics, it reveals to us that she is bedecked with those items signifying royalty. Verse 4 describes her in terms of being arrayed in purple, meaning what? Royalty and wealth. All right, and scarlet meaning deadly, and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls. This is most certainly an image of the top of the hierarchy of the Roman authorities. It says the woman in view here is representative of no other than the Roman Empire itself. Now, sitting upon a scarlet-colored beast, this beast bears a striking resemblance to the beast that was mentioned in Revelation 13 verse 1. It says the scarlet colored would indicate to us that the beast was deadly and wicked like the previous beast. This one has 7 heads and 10 horns, just like the one that was mentioned in 13. It says the 7 heads are later described to us in Revelation 17 verses 9 through 10. It says here is the mind that have wisdom, okay, and the 7 heads are 7 mountains, it says, on which the woman sits, and they are 7 kings. I says we don't even need to speculate any on what this really means. It obviously refers to the emperors of the Roman Empire. Okay? Now the 10 horns are explained to us in verse 12. It says the 10 horns are thou saw are the 10 kings. The Roman Empire as a republic was organized as providential government. Alright? It says each province was ruled by a governor that was appointed by the emperor. Alright? There were many more than just 10 provinces, though, in the Roman Empire. And there were not exactly 7 emperors at the time of John's letter of Revelation when it was being written. It says a figurative view of the imagery that's being used here would be that the beast had 7 perfect heads and 10 complete horns. That means authority. That's what that means. The imagery will be something that is easily pictured in the imaginations of the first century readers and is more likely the complete sum of all the Roman provinces that were represented by the number 10 with the 7 mountains, which were also kings, and being the emperors that were reigning over the king of the provinces. Discussion of the 10 horns is taken up in more detail later on in this very study. So stay tuned for that. It'll be coming up in the next couple of weeks as we draw closer to the end of this book, this letter here. All right, the full names of blasphemy, let's look at that, would be reference to the very names of the beast that were called himself. Dominion during his reign issued this decree as Lord and God Dominion. And such, therefore, it would have been unmistakable in the very minds of the first readers of John's Revelation letter that was referring to the emperor. All right, let's look at Revelation 17, verse 4. It says, and the woman was arrayed in purple and in scarlet, and she was decked out with gold and precious stones, and pearls, and having in her very hands the golden cup that was full of abominations, even the unclean things of her fornications. It's spiritual there, okay? The woman sitting on the beast is arrayed in royal trappings, meaning imagery or dressing. This imagery is descriptive of the Roman leadership. It says she is carrying a golden cup that is full of abominations. It says in verse 6, this is where we see that this woman is drunken in her blood of all the saints, with also the blood of the martyrs of Jesus Christ, signifying some of the contents of the golden cup. It says the unclean things of her fornication would represent all the evils which have come from her adultery and persecution. Revelation 17, verses 5 through 6. Let's look at that, folks. It says, and upon the forehead I saw a name that was written. It said, Mystery of Babylon, the great mother of the harlots, and the abominations of the earth. Now 6. And then I saw the woman that was drunken with the very blood of the saints and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus Christ. And when I saw her, I wondered with a great wonder. Meaning probably with stress and disturbance. That's why it's mentioned twice there. God is giving this description to us as an identification of the Scarlet Woman. She is the main harlot of John's letter of Revelation. She is the main one that's responsible for adultery, that is referred to us as the mother of harlots. It says in Daniel, Nebuchadnezzar, who is king of Babylon, made a statue that was roughly 90 feet tall and 9 feet wide. It says he set this huge statue up in the very plain of Dora, in the very province of of Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego. Says they refer to bow down to Nebuchadnezzar's statue and worship it, and were thrown into the furious furnace, which means they refused. I said referred, but I meant refused to bow down. And they were thrown into furnace, according to Daniel chapter 3. It says the scarlet woman, this mother of harlots, was named Babylon the Great. What the real Babylon and the great harlot named in Revelation chapter 17 share in common? As the question says. Well, they have imposed forced worship of an adultery, of an idol, of the king of their country on their citizens. It says, look back on the lesser land beast that is described to us in Revelation chapter 17. We see in verse 14 that the lesser beast, which has been identified to us as the Roman imperial cult, known as Concilia, remember we talked about that, made images or statues to the greater beast and required these statues to be worshipped by the people. Okay? They had the very power to cause those who would refuse to worship the images to be killed. In Revelation 13 verse 15 says this is identical to what has happened in Babylon under the very reign of King Nebuchadnezzar. It says this great whore who is identified with Babylon, who forced her people to worship idols or false gods. In Peter's epistle, this is where he had made reference to Babylon in 1 Peter 5 verse 13. It says, although questioned by some who would see this verse as a reference to Peter's wife, says the best view is almost certainly that the church in Babylon is meant at the time of this very writing of Revelation. Babylon had been destroyed and it was never to be rebuilt again. And it was nothing more than just an isolated military outpost at best. It says there is no evidence anywhere that Peter was literally in Babylon at any time. It says there is evidence that Peter did travel to Rome, and this evidence produces the apostate church. It says tradition places the very death of Peter in Rome by the order of Nero. It's Nero. It says at the time of Peter, when he wrote this apostle, it was necessary to speak in guarded terms about the city of Rome in view of all the oppression that was being forced over the people by Nero. Okay. There are a number of reasons on why Peter would refer to Rome as Babylon. Ancient Babylon was a center of enmity and oppression of God's chosen people. So Rome had become, in the times of the apostles, says Peter referred to his readers as strangers and pilgrims that were in a foreign land. That's recorded in 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 11. It says, as were the Israelites in Babylon time. Babylon was well known to the Jews as being a nation who worshipped many different false gods, as was also Rome. It says, all these considerations were taken together, have great weight in indicating that Peter's meaning was the very city of Rome. It was most significant here in this examination to recognize the very fact that Jerusalem was never referenced or referred to as Babylon. It says in Scripture, Peter almost certainly had Rome in mind when he spoke allegorically of Babylon. His readership would have known this which strongly indicates that it was a well-known and commonly understood reference to the city of Rome among the Jewish citizens, says, which the Romans would be unable to understand. Says this well-known reference to the city of Rome certainly carried along with it over to John's Jewish readership, and there is every reason to believe that when the name of Babylon was given to the harlot woman, the city of Rome came to the minds of the Christians. It says we must keep in mind that what Revelation meant to them is what it must also certainly mean to us today. It was written specifically to them with applications for us as well. In addition to being named Babylon the Great, it says the Scarlet Woman is called the mother of harlots. It says a mother is responsible for producing offspring. Okay? She forms a mental image of someone from whom others come forth. It says Nebuchadnezzar forced idol worship, proliferated, and it produced idol worshippers, false gods. It says out of her title of all her citizens. It says the Scarlet Woman, who's identified by name was Babylon, was said to have made the inhabitants of the earth drunk with the very wine of her fornication. Fornication in this context is representative of idol worship or the worship of a false god or many false gods. The Scarlet Woman is the great harlot, was being guilty of forced adultery on the citizens of Rome. And if it's happening today, it also applies today. It says, moreover, says this woman delights to drink or to partake of the blood of God's saints. This certainly fits the very city of Rome of her severe oppression of the first century Christians there. So she has spilled so much blood and partaken of so much bloodshed that she is intoxicated by it. It says the blood of the saints is all over her right now. It says the Scarlet Woman's identity is further determined by what? The explanation that was given by John, the angel, beginning in verse 7 of this chapter. Look at 17, verses 7 through 8. It says, and the angel of the Lord came to me. It says, wherefore dost thou wander? It says, I will tell you all the mystery of this woman and of the beast that cometh her. It says, which has 7 heads and 10 horns. It says, the beast that you saw was and is not, but is about yet to come out of the abyss and to go into perdition. It says, and they dwell on the earth will wander, meaning they whose name have not been written in the Lamb's book of life from the very beginning of this world, when it was created. That's the foundation there. It says, when they behold the beast, how that he was and is not, but will come. It says, of the beast comes her. It says, this imagery is of the Scarlet Woman being born upon or supported by the beast. This certainly fits the relationship between the city of Rome and the empire itself. All right. It says, the beast that thou saw was and is not, and is about to come, up out of the abyss, and to go into perdition. Says the beast that was and is not and is about to come, and then go is probably a reference to the changing leadership of the empire. The emperors, would often come and emperors went. It is obvious that the imagery that's being used here is one of changing the nature of the beast, as it would strengthen over time and get more evil. It says the line of evil Rome emperors certainly fits this description very well. History also records that there was some controversy around the death of Nero, since many people doubted that he was really dead from suicide. It was suspected that he actually fled to Pertha, where he was gathering an army from among them to return back to Rome and unseat whatever emperor was in control and rule over the Roman Empire again himself. Dominion claimed in his early years as an emperor to be Nero returned. So it was a common superstition that was being spread among the people of that time that dominion was thought to be Nero. Says either returned or reincarnated. Says the allusion to the was and is not and is about to come certainly appears to fit the text here. Says we must keep in mind what the writer is appealing to the imaginations of the first century readers, and they would certainly be familiar with the general superstitions that were being spread around at that time and would be able to understand what was being illustrated here. Says that they that dwell on earth will wander, meaning they whose name had not been written in the Lamb's book of life from the very foundation or beginning of this world. Says obviously those who never had their names written in the Lamb's book of life is a reference to the infidels. Okay? It says their wonder may be an expression of amazement at the beast's vitality and the very ability to die or to disappear and then to return in another form to continue out his deadly designs or destruction on the Christians. It says those who do have their names written in the book of life, which are the faithful, immediately understand that as terrible and as tenacious as the beast appears to be, says his end is going to be perdition. It says the Greek word for perdition here means destruction, utter ruin, and loss of well-being. It says this also fits well with the superstitions of a returning Nero as dominion, who would rule again and then disappear into ruin. Let's look at chapter 17 of Revelation, verses 9 through 11. It says, here is the mind that has wisdom. It says, the 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits. It says 10, verse 10, and they are 7 kings. 5 are fallen. The one is, the other is not yet come. And when he comes, he must continue a little while. Okay, 11. And the beast that was and is not is himself also Elias, and is of 7, and he goes into perdition. It says the 7 heads of the beast were 7 heads of the Roman Empire. It says the first emperor who was emperor under the constitutional law was Augustus. He was the first one that was elected by the Senate and approved by the military. It says election and military approval were necessary by the Roman law. Julius Caesar was dictator before Rome was even republic, and was only in office because of popular demand. He was never legally appointed to this position or his position under constitutional law, though. So with this in mind, says we start our counting with the first legally elected head of the Roman Empire. It says as a republic under the government in force at the very time of the writing of John's letter of Revelation. It says the first 5 emperors are Augustus, who was 13 AD to 26 BC. We have Tiberius, which was 14 AD to 37 AD. We have Caligula, which is 37 AD to 41 AD. We have Claudius, 41 AD to 64 AD. And Nero, 64 to 68 AD. Now, in verse 10, it says that these 5 are fallen, thus out of the picture. They're removed here. It says one is in verse 10, would be Vespasian. It says the 6th king and emperor, who ruled from 69 AD to 79 AD. It says other is not yet come, and when he comes, he must continue a little while, and it would be Titus, not the prophet, but the king, who only reigned from 79 AD to 81 AD. It says this reign was short in nature. It was only for a little while. And he was the 7th king. Now we come to the king in verse 11, who is Elias. All right, this is the first mention that we hear of this king, who would have been dominion. All right, he is the very one that was and is not, which refers back to Dominion's claim that he was reincarnated, which is kind of silly, but that's what a lot of people believed during that time. Reincarnated Nero. It says also Elias was of the 7, all right, which means that he was related to them. Dominion was of the brother of Titus and son of Vespasian of Flavian, of the Flavian dynasty. All right. Now clearly the text appears by all accounts and also points to the very date of the writing of the letter of Revelation during the very reign of Vespasian. It says this creates a difficulty in that tradition places John on the island of Patmos, which is like a prison island, but that's where he was supposedly when the letter of Revelation was being put together and written. All right, having been exiled there by Dominion himself, says the letter of Revelation is believed by the majority of scholars today to have been written towards the end of Dominion's reign, that's based largely on the secular writings. It says there are some difficulties with John's writing the letter of Revelation, as at the time, chiefly that one must ask. It says what good it would do to write the book in 95 to 96 AD, says when the fiercest persecutions were almost over. It says additionally, how much time would it take to copy and to distribute this letter to churches in Asia Minor to which the letter was being addressed to? Okay. It says there is a possible explanation for this. Now, secular writing states that Revelation was written in the very days of Dominion. it was hard to tell that the original Greek, if the means that it was written then or seen then. Now, John could have been also sent to Patmos by the local authorities that were there in Ephesus. It says, rather than by Baspian himself. It says, sometime during his reign. It says, the Gnostics in Ephesus felt that John was causing problems there, as he was exposing all their error of their thinking, of their false doctrine. It says, John being on Patmos during Baspian's very reign would make the writing of the letter of Revelation being written in the late 70s AD. It's very possible, but John may have still been there during the very reign of Titus and then allowed back to the main island around 81 AD. It says the letter of Revelation at that point could have been copied and then dispensed or dispersed to all the churches in Asia Minor to be seen in the very days of Dominion. Dominion's worst persecutions started later into his reign. So that would have given the Christian time to read the letter and to know what was coming shortly and help them to get ready for the intense persecutions that were to come. Let's look at Revelation chapter 17, verses 12 through 13. It says, the 10 horns that you saw are 10 kings who have received no kingdom as yet, but they receive authority as kings. It says, with the beast for 1 hour. It says, these have one mind. It says, they give their power and authority unto the very beast. Okay. Now this is an explanation of the 10 horns of the beast that were mentioned back in verse 3. It says the 10 horns represent the power of the empire, the Roman Empire that is, which was concentrated in the very provinces and not in the very city of Rome itself. It says the 10 kings who had not yet received a kingdom were vessel kings and leaders who ruled, leaders there, who ruled over the provinces and received authority from Rome. It says, basking in this authority for a short period of time, 1 hour. It says, these vessel kings, realizing that their power and authority came directly from Rome, its imperial Rome, were very eager to please those who were in power in the imperial city. It says this would definitely explain why they were so zealous to persecute Christians during that time. It says when recruited by Rome to respond to the insurrection, they viewed the Christians as easy targets. Also being able to carry the favor of the emperor easily. It says leaders of the provinces ruled longer with the favor of the emperor. Okay. Now, when we look at Daniel prophesies of a great beast in Daniel 7 verse 23. It says, thus he said, says the fourth beast will be the fourth kingdom upon the earth. It says, which will be the verse from all kingdoms, and will devour, meaning eat the whole earth, and shall tread it down, and break it into many pieces. It says the beast of Daniel is the very same as the beast of Revelation. That's mentioned in Revelation, in the letter there. It says this is an unmistakable reference to the Roman Empire. It says there is no other empire that fits this very description that's devoured that devours the whole earth. Daniel goes further on to say that out of this fourth kingdom will arise one who will speak great words against the Most High, and will wear out the saints of the Most High, and think to change times and laws. That's recorded in Daniel chapter 7, verse 25. This can be no other, I want to say this clearly here, no other than the person, but an emperor of the fourth kingdom. It says the beast of Daniel, and also the beast of the letter that's recorded in Revelation, there's no other imagery that comes to mind in the very imaginations of the first century readers of the book of the letter of Revelation, except for what we just talked about. Okay, they're basically the same. It's Roman, the empire. Let's look at Revelation 17, verse 14. These will war against the Lamb, that's Jesus, and the Lamb will overcome them, for he is the Lord of lords and the King of kings, and they also shall overcome, or will overcome, that are with him, called and are elect chosen, and are being faithful. All right. Now the leaders of these very provinces rose up against the Christians to the call of the imperial city, that's Rome there. However, the faithful Christians that were against all odds will prevail against them and win in the very end, victoriously. The Lamb in this verse is obviously Jesus Christ, all right, who was betrayed in other New Testament other New Testament writings as well, as we see the Lamb being betrayed in John 1 verse 29 and also in John 1 verse 36. Revelation 17 verse 15 says, and he says unto me, the waters which you saw, where the harlot says are peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues. Says this was an explanation of the waters upon which the harlot was sitting on. Says given to John by the angel in verse 1 communicates on Revelation are a lot easier when it explains itself from within. Okay. There is little room for error in such instances. Revelation 17 verse 16. Okay, Revelation 17 verse 16 says, and the 10 horns which you have saw, and the beast, says these will hate the harlot, and will make her desolate and naked, and shall eat her very flesh, and shall burn her utterly with fire. Now the kings of the provinces of the city of Rome will ultimately turn against the city of Rome. Or not the city, but the imperial city of Rome it is. It says one of Rome's greatest fears was the insurrection and turmoil in the very provinces. History records that is precisely what has happened to the Roman Empire. She was then defeated from within by her own very subjects who lived there. Revelation 17 verse 17 says, for God did put in their very hearts to do his mind, and to come to one mind, and to give their kingdom to the beast until the words of God should be accomplished. All right? This was John's way of saying God's will be done. All right? To ask how God did this is but an exercise in futility. Okay? Says throughout all history, God has used men and nations to carry out his very purpose. he could turn a nation to fighting within itself, as in the very case of Midian during the time of Gideon, and Judges 7 verse 22 says, now the Philistines in the days of Saul, says 1 Samuel 14:20, and in the battle of Moab in I think it's Ammon, says against Mount Seir, says God gave victory to him, Jehoshaphat, without the army of without the army of Judah lifting a sword, in 2 Chronicles 20 verse 23. So God's subjective of putting in the hearts of the kings in the book in Revelation chapter 17 to do this mind is merely an example of his divine guidance in everything. It says God is in charge and his will be accomplished. Not one word will fail. All will come to pass. Okay? And we'll stop right there. And we'll continue on with this in a moment. We'll do part 2.